Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. I'm really happy, thrilled, excited to have Jon Husband in the house today. Jon and I go way back. Maybe we'll get to that story at another point, Jon. But first, a quick bio. And then I'm going to get right into it. So Jon coined the term and developed the concept of wirearchy beginning over 2 decades ago in 1999. After a career consulting about organizational structure and effectiveness, Jon has often suggested the implications of wirearchy are gradually becoming fundamental elements of today's emerged networked workplace dynamics. His work focuses on exploring and understanding the ongoing shift from traditional hierarchical structures to more fluid and collaborative frameworks enabled by digital networks, and emphasizes the importance of concepts like knowledge, sharing, trust, decision-making in modern networked organizational settings. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Jon and/or wirearchy, first, a definition of wirearchy, and then Jon will get right into it. You define wirearchy.
That was quite a mouthful, that long intro. Anyway.
Oh, come on. We could go for hours on what you've given us, and certainly selfishly me. But you define wirearchy as a dynamic flow of power and authority based on information, trust, credibility, and a focus on results enabled by interconnected technology and people. So when I first glommed onto this, probably circa 2005, 2006, and I finally had the guts to reach out to you circa 2008 and say, turns out we're both living in the same city. I'd love to have a chat with you. My first question for you is, wirearchy, how have you seen its concept evolve, given, and I don't want to date either of us, but it's been 25 years now that you've put this into the world, which is kind of why I wanted to talk with you in this particular year. I think it's phenomenal. It's been 25 years. But how do you see the concept having evolved, given now such a deep penetration in digital transformation, the societal changes we've undergone in those 25 years, notwithstanding a pandemic? I'm just curious, between what you thought it was and where we are we at, Mr. Husband?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack and respond to. So let me start by saying, me, along with any several million people, started reading futurists with a lot of interest about 30 or 40 years ago about the coming information age. And I think, particularly given the last 5 years, we can't argue anymore that it is not fully upon us. And it's been interesting to me, the most recent surge in interest in artificial intelligence and its capabilities has, I think, all of a sudden made the light bulb go on for people everywhere that kind of took surfing the internet for weather or for emails or for whatever you do on your now almost exclusively on your very small computer is with us, and it has penetrated and surrounded all aspects of our lives. So let's start there with me being, I think, very careful 20 some years ago, 25 years ago, to not try to build a detailed framework or a methodology or a solution out of a catchy sounding made up word, but rather described it as an emerging or emergent organizing principle. And so I would say, to cut to the chase of your answer, although there's yards and yards or meters and meters in between, we see it, that working definition, for better and for worse, in many, many aspects of our activities in society today, including misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, hugely efficient retail buying chains and delivery, and all sorts of kinds of what used to be, let's say, low-grade knowledge work foisted back onto the customer to do the work via a website, or the I think very, very real now threat, not even a threat, it's beginning to be implemented, of certain kinds of AI, particularly trained on contained or customized data sets, is mowing through what were called bullshit jobs. All of the information processing jobs that there were thousands of them probably at TELUS at one point in time. So I would say that in the turbulent melee of the last 20 years about coming to terms with these new conditions, there have been many solutions and approaches prescribed, and the words digital transformation have become second nature to pretty much everybody. And yet there is this ongoing and now starting to recycle lament about how little many things have changed, particularly when it comes to the human side of using knowledge and interconnectedness to get things done or to implement real change. So the hierarchical aspects of particularly workplaces, but also I would say societal governance and other things, are still very much in place. At the same time, let me just take a moment and read something. I just got an email, a newsletter. You might see the same one. It's written by a guy called Anand. I cannot pronounce his last name, called The Ink.
Yeah.
And so he just says, let me just read this for you with your permission. If any one of the major social, economic, political transformations that occurred in the United States in recent decades had occurred on its own, it would be a huge deal. And then there's a bullet point of about 10, and I'll shorten them. 1, progress towards gender equality. 2, rise of China, choice to open trade with China. 3, oligarchic hoarding of wealth and power since the early 80s. 4, extension of rights and power and freedom to Black Americans. But here's where we get into more about what I think is pertinent to Wirearchy. The digital revolution, upending everything, shuttering industries, birthing new ones, making everything quickly obsolete. The climate crisis, enough said about that. New ideas about gender and sexuality, that's also cultural and due to information flows. Fracturing of old media and old sources of authority for finding out about the world, and the rise of a more fragmented landscape and the explosion of lies. And the COVID pandemic and its still in process upheavals to patterns of work. And particularly with the response to COVID and the whole still being roundly debated issues of remote work. I mean, a lot of what was foreseen in that very generalized definition, I think, are unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
We're learning to come to terms with them. So the sociology of our behaviors and our responses is taking longer. I would argue that the new, if you will, sociology of management is coming from things like the Cynefin framework, where Dave Snowden is exploring the ways to use diversity, new forms of structure, exploration to find out what works in, zones of complexity and so on. So all of these things have happened in the last 20 years, and I could go on with a list of, down both arms. So I would say it's happening now. I certainly didn't do the work of writing, an academic or a business kind of tome about Wirearchy or marketing much as a solution, and that's fine. What pleases me is that I think it's inspired or made a fair number of people that I respect think, as it has me, and as it continues to me, because I think there's obviously real shifts in power and expressing of authority or taking of authority due to networks. I think there's a lot that's horrible that's happened as well. I think I was also careful at the beginning to kind of market yourself. You have to promote the utopian aspects of it, but there are dystopian aspects in that general and generic definition as well, if you choose to interpret it that way. So, I'm old enough now to be more or less retired. And I'm kind of just watching the world. I think it's a fascinating time. It's a worrisome time, I think, very much so, because I think a lot of the structures of power that come from wealth and from different kinds of networks is well and alive in the world. I think we face a perilous time in terms of information and misinformation being used in service of growing authoritarianism. That's part of Wirearchy too, is using those networks and what media has become to fragment people into tribes. And so I'm watching it all with interest. I think it's still pertinent. I'm glad that, I think it's still a word that pops up here and there in use. That's those are my random thoughts on a
So let me connect a couple of those dots. So one of the things I wanted to get into, Jon, was in the definition, you talk obviously about that flow or dynamic flow of power and authority, but then you preface it by saying, well, that's based on information, trust, credibility. And so what I want to get into is hone in a little bit more with the definition, again, kind of current day status, to ask you, well, when you think about leaders in these organizations today, and we want to focus ourselves, let's just look in the organizations in the workplace, not political or societal realms. So based on information, trust, credibility, how are leaders doing, in your opinion, in advocating for, if not inculcating, cultures of dynamic flows of power and authority that is based on truth, that is based on being credible, that is based on being authentically giving of information, given what you've seen between, well, now really 4 decades, the 90s, the aughts, the 10s, and now the 20s?
Well, first of all, I'd say that with the research and the kind of work that you do, you're much better positioned to answer that question than I am. I can provide a response, whether it's
that's what I'm looking for, Jon.
Whether it's an informed opinion or not is, you can decide, and people will decide. I think that there's a reason why in, I guess, leadership and particularly organizational culture change, ideation and idealization, there's still a very large, if I'm not mistaken, there's still a very large reliance on a relatively few and relatively old stories about democratized workplaces, the Gores of this world, the Semcos of this world, more recently Hayer perhaps, and so on. But the stories of that happening are very, very few and far between. I can go back to my original song and dance and say that there are methodologies built off of core assumptions, of which I've already spoken about, the generic codifications of Taylorism, and the way that they are both put into use and then managed lead to a very clear set of beliefs about how the organizational world works and how power and authority in it work.
Mm-hmm.
And those haven't changed, and those continue to be reinforced by compensation strategies, titles, and so on and so forth. It also is, I wouldn't even say spilled over, it has bled long ago into the burgeoning of business schools, the expectations of graduates coming out of business schools, the kinds of work that knowledge work has come to be defined up until roughly 5 to 10 years ago. The notions of, everybody, including me and you, made a lot of noise about the benefits of collaboration and cooperation, and how that will lead to better performance. And all of those things are, in the idealized situation, I think are very true. They can also lead to major screw-ups, snafu, situation normal all effed up.
Right.
In many, many cases. What that implies for leadership, so I'm going to tie back to your original question, is that I believe these things. I'm just opinionated at this stage because I'm not really in the fray. The large majority of senior leaders, let's say North America or North America and Western Europe, are if not ensconced in, lean towards being technocrats. And I'm reminded of a very good book. I think you know of it. I think we talked about it long ago, called Artists, Technocrats, and I can't remember the last one. Anyway, The Dreams, Realities, and Illusions of Leadership by Patricia Pitcher. Artists, Craftsmen, and Technocrats, or Artists, Technocrats, and Craftsmen. And it's the odd blend of the artist's vision, soul, heart, lead, care, win, if you will, with the analytic and business, analytic acuity and business acumen, instinct, and so on of the technocrat, combined in practice become craftsmen or craftspeople.
Yeah.
And Patricia Pitcher's argument was that an effective leader, and particularly in the more complex and ongoingly interactive, that's the thing that's different today. Everything's in constant motion. It takes a craftsman of some sort or other, and that is going to be related to what I call the nature of work, the type of work being done by the industry, the type of knowledge that has been put to use in a given organization to address the opportunities it's chosen to focus on, its purpose in doing so, and so on, are all going to lead to the need for leadership. I won't say a leader, but leadership that knows how to marinate in that, if you will, and become part of it, so that they whatever if it's collective leadership, if it's a small group of people, the 4 people you'd want out in a boat in the middle of a lake, whatever, that kind of leadership needs to understand. And I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know. I mean, obviously, executives and leaders in industries and in companies of any size are immersed in this question all day long, every day. They're marinating in their jobs, as you know. You've done some marinating yourself, but it depends a lot on how you marinate with whether or not you're open to think or not. Geez, that reminds me of a book I read once upon a time called Open to Think. The world around us, like the list I read has changed enormously. If you look back at, what things looked like when I was in university or when you were in university, even since then, my goodness. I always marvel at the fact that you can sit in a cafe in some little out of the way country, let's say like in the Caribbean where I was, and push a button and some document flies around the world through the air to a colleague, and then you can get on a thing like this and talk about it, and that's your work. So remote work and hybrid work has also created some very, very significant challenges for what I'd call leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was more or less right back then when I said that, what I meant by hierarchy would not make hierarchy disappear or lessen its impact. It would, in many cases, increase the impact, but it would sharpen the game for a lot of leaders. And that, I think, has proven to be true, because a lot of what we would call leaders have more or less ignored or not gone into that swamp of finding out what all that's all about, which is part of the issue.
Mm-hmm. What I love still to this day, 25 years later, about hierarchy is it's just like you've pointed out. It's not a replacement for hierarchy. We still need a hierarchy. It is that dynamic flow of power and authority through essentially better leadership effectively. And I think you've touched on it now, which I want to delve into, just your thoughts and or opinions, John. And that is, going into the pandemic wasn't really a hybrid work type of culture that really was pervasive. The pandemic lockdown, of course, created a new mechanism in which work can be accomplished, i.e., there has to be a digital, two-way flow of information, knowledge, trust, etc. I'm just curious now, as you kind of hear or read some of the stories of leaders pulling people back into the office full time. What do you glean out of some of the recent-ish news of organizations of medium and large size saying, no, we need you back in the office now? Do you see that being sort of a point in which where the trust or the credibility or or just the plain old Taylorism hierarchy coming further back into effect? I'm just curious, given you're a student of the game of organizations, and so I wanted to tap into the professorial Jon Husband on this one, and sort of with hierarchy obviously at the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, sure. Let me go get the chalkboard and the chalk and whatnot.
Exactly.
Well, it's an interesting question. Again, you and a lot of the people that follow you and I will know and will have read over the last 6 months or a year any number of reactions and different kinds of surveys or polls that have been taken, and arguments pro and con, with polls saying, I think I'm definitely generalizing here, but most knowledge workers in most industries prefer a minimum of a couple days a week or 3 days a week at home. There are some enterprises that have been particularly the senior leadership have been quite strong about saying, well, you come back or else.
Yeah.
And there are, of course, the arguments that we know of, FaceTime and human conversation and contact is different than spending your life, in front of one Zoom meeting after another, day after day. So those are, and at the same time, we know that almost immediately, luckily, it just happened that telepresence had been in development for about 20 years, that Zoom and its competitors or its and similar products were just ready to go. Microsoft Teams, I forget what the other big ones are. And so bang, it started happening. And we've learned a lot in a year and a half or two about the sociology of online meetings. And I remember saying a long time ago, there's some things that I think are very, very good about them. I know for one, I'm somebody that when there's a group of people tend to talk quite a bit, and I've had to work at curtailing that, and I've been told to curtail it at times. But it's harder to interrupt people in general on Zoom meetings. And it's better for concentrating, and it's particularly in the hands of skilled facilitators. They can be very, very effective, particularly when coupled with things like Miro or Trello or other kinds of workspaces where you can get a lot of collaborative happening going on in breakout rooms and so on and so forth. And there have been surveys and I think polls suggesting that actually in many cases productivity has either stayed the same or improved with some kind of hybrid arrangements going on. There have also been articles, and I tend to believe these, that there are and I think it's an attitude that goes way, way back, which is that we have to see our employees to know that we're controlling them, or we're in power, or that we're managing. And again, this comes back to this notion of what does managing mean? Does it mean exercising power and authority, or does it mean, I think I coined a term a long time ago, you might remember, called championing and channeling.
Yeah.
Championing good ideas, or championing ideas and channeling resources and time and energy to them, to all those little dots coming out of the hierarchy, which is very much the same as the in Kinevin, I forget what it's called, but fail faster to learn faster. But you channel resources where activity seems to be heating up, or where there's some interest, or there's some new discovery, new piece of information, response to a crisis, urgency. And that's how organizations like amoebas often, creep along in their form. What was the, sorry, I've lost the focus of the original question, just to keep my mind in.
Yeah, I was just trying to kind of figure out if your thoughts on the layering of Wirearchy, has it helped, has it hindered the current kind of state, right, of hybrid work? And then why are many leaders hauling people back in the office? It seems like part of Wirearchy is about trust, right? It's about flow. It's about collaboration. And I'm not one for being all remote. I'm not one for being all in the office. I think there's that sweet spot you've already alluded to between the two. But why do you think, again, using your layer of wisdom, why are leaders hauling people back into the office 4 and 5 days a week? Seems anti-Wirearchy.
Well, no, it's not anti-Wirearchy. It's I mean, humans are social animals, and we've gotten to where we've gotten by sharing information with each other, starting around the campfire, which, this stick works better than that stick.
Right.
Look, this stone is sharp. Let's use it to bang on some meat. And ever since then, so I think there's really a lot to it. Where I lost my train of thought was I was recently in a Zoom meeting. You may remember, it's still going strong. I think it's 10 years now. But there's a little group of people called the Wirearchy Commons that we meet once a month, and that's Harold and Valdis Krebs, a number of people that you would know together, and we keep talking about these kinds of things. Thomas Vanderwall from the Connected Company. And one of our participants, I think you know him, Francois Lavallée.
Oh my God, yeah.
Was saying he had just recently interviewed a company here in Montreal, interviewed its president, and it reminded me that I had spoken at this company about 3 or 4 years ago. It was then called GSoft, and I don't know what it's called now. But it's a very, very participative and open culture. The day I went and spoke was kind of the introduction to a sort of a half-day open space. And they have a work from anywhere, no vacations policy, take vacation when you want, so on. But what counts is the results, deliver your work.
Yeah.
And they also have 1 day a week where it's, come to the office if you want to kind of day. And what's interesting, this company's been going and growing ever since I first became aware of it, which was probably at least 5 years ago. And they're up to, I think sizable 400 or 500 employees now, something like that. But the culture is such that there's something like 90% attendance
Hmm.
on the Thursdays because people want to go to work.
Right. Yeah. They want that connection, that human touch, right?
Yeah, and you know the leader, the founder and the president and CEO is a very humble guy, very quiet guy, very relaxed guy. You know, he's part of the generation that sees the value in this kind of thing. But you know, again, the company insists on results and doing things, but evidently people love working there. You know, now if that's replicable in 5,000 person or 50,000 workplace persons, I doubt it very much. There are always pockets of people. I was often one of those kinds of people when I worked for organizations, which go off in a corner and grumble with a couple of other malcontents, um, which is why I ended up being independent, I'm sure. Um, but I think that coming back to, I think that what's happening with the hybrid and the remote work environment is that it's revealing very clearly what are the drivers and the motivations for what kind of management you want to practice at company X.
Hmm.
Uh, I think there's a number of the big banks in Canada, which are, they're kind of legendary in our country for stability and good performance and pretty progressive cultures. And I think they kind of gave up on trying to force everybody to come back to work, if I'm not mistaken. And it certainly seems from what I'm seeing and hearing that some forms of hybrid work are here to stay. I would think that with both federal government and Ontario and Quebec and BC government workers, I'm sure that the flexible work week is well rooted already. Now that's revealing to us what it means. What does team performance mean in a hybrid and remote environment? How do we measure? Do we
Hmm.
measure differently? How do we keep performance reviews? Do we enhance 360-degree performance reviews? Do we can them all together? Do we insist on do we try to copy the work of results only work environments? Do we eventually split up into smaller units loosely joined, to go back to David Weinberger's phrase of about 30 years ago, small pieces loosely joined?
Hmm.
What we know now is that hyperlinks and platforms and telepresence and AI capabilities and recording everything is not going to go away. So it will eventually, in whatever form, reveal the kinds of authority and power that a given leadership team of a given organization want to carry out, what they're comfortable with. And that, I would say what we've also seen more so in the last 5 years, but starting about 20 years ago, with the rise of things like open space or even early attempts at quality circles, TQM, one of your predecessors, Merv, what's his name? Merv. You remember Merv at AGT and
Oh, I
BC,
do. Yeah.
the
Deneen.
OD guy. No, Merv, somebody else. Anyway, because they used to apply for the Baldrige Award every year. But anyway, the decision making in general and trying to find fulcrum points and leverage for what has become perpetual beta, ongoing change, is what am I looking for? Sorry, I'm getting old. Well, we're involved essentially in perpetual beta all the time now. So it's bound to be that smaller groups have to find ways to interact, and that has very large implications for how do we lead all this.
Hmm.
Leadership becomes a lot more, I mean, you've been all over this, about facilitating
Yeah.
groups, championing and channeling. And I think that the demand for participation is not going away. I mean, I'm not overly familiar with it, but I've certainly read a number of pieces about how younger workers, particularly in knowledge-intensive environments, are pretty demanding about, you know, their rights, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, why they're going to do it, and so on. Hence the notion of purpose. Leadership is changing,
isn't it? It always is. But one of the things I want to come back to is actually the last 5 words of the Wirearchy definition. I want to layer on those. I'll define them for listeners, uh, and ask you about current state of organizational wellness and health. So, in the Wirearchy definition, of course, the last 5 words are interconnected by technology and people. And what I love about that is your point, prescient as it was 25 years ago. Look, we need to be in unison effectively, right? It's not a replacement of people by technology. It's interconnected by technology and people. So here's where I'm going, John. What I've recognized slightly going into the pandemic, and then most certainly rubber stamped post pandemic, if that's what indeed we are in, is whether it's Mental Health America, whether it's Stats Canada, whether it's Gallup, it doesn't matter where you find the data. The data suggests that there's a growing crisis in the Western world, at least, of stress, of anxiety, of sadness, of loneliness, even burnout. All of these kind of human factors, John, as you know all too well, have increased with some egregious muscle over the past 5 to 10 years. And so when we're interconnected by technology and people, I'm curious for you, what are we doing right and or wrong? And what might you think we should be doing a better job of if in fact data supports that, you know, the human being part of people, that like they're suffering. So we're getting something wrong, and I can't quite pinpoint what it is. And I just love to get your professorial learned opinion on this one.
I'm trying to hold my thoughts together, so I'll just blurt out a couple of phrases, hopefully in the right order to allow me to build a response.
Yeah.
First would be the future is filters.
Mm.
Then I would say we are we are connected all the time. When we wake up, when we go to bed, in between driving cars, and so on. We're in a tsunami of flows of information.
Yeah.
The next issue there is we need some form of PKM. I've often tried to get Harold to either write a book or try to start a movement to insist that it be taught before the end of high school to everybody for digital literacy. The notion of, so if we go back to June of 2001, Weston Bayshore in Vancouver, there's in the HR world, at that time, I think there still is, there's a conference every year, North American conference called the World at Work. It used to be the Canadian or the American Compensation Association, and they always tagged on the Canadian Compensation Association to make it a North American conference, but they changed 25 years ago towards recognizing that it was about, you know, work design, if you will.
Yeah.
And I did a presentation there with 2 other fellows, Ken Malloy and John Dickinson, about creating the workplace of the future. I can share it with you if you want. It's still it's still very pertinent, but and it's the first presentation I ever did with the word Wirearchy in it.
Oh, wow.
Also got complexity in there, so had three main implications of the world we were moving into. Wirearchy was one, growing complexity was the second, and the third one was mass customization as a principle. Like started writing about the mass customization of knowledge work and my work, my way, I'm going to do it my way, and blah, blah, blah. But the last slide in it was, this is almost verbatim, in an every which way, always on interconnected world, the most important competency to develop and sustain is the ability to be connected to yourself. And so you're absolutely right. There's an epidemic of mental health problems everywhere. It's growing. It's ambient anxiety because we're in a new set of conditions where we are constantly bombarded by information. I have, in the last year, been trying to make myself on purpose learn to read paper books again. Most people's attention has been fragmented. All sorts of people think they have ADHD. They maybe do because of this condition. And I see, and obviously coming back to the definition of an emerging principle, organizing principle of Wirearchy, we see that governments are getting very concerned about the effects of content and let's say, the horizontality of hyperlinks with things like TikTok and so on. So the reason I focused on information or knowledge, credibility, and trust is also what we've seen evident in the last 5 years when you talk about, the growth of the impact on it. We have seen the very, very serious impacts of misinformation, disinformation, false information, deep fakes, and so on and so forth. All of this is with us now. It's not gonna stop. It's not gonna go away. Nobody's gonna come out with the one right policy move somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Washington or Ottawa that's gonna make all of this behavior happen or stop happening. People are at the other end of the line, and that's what ultimately is being revealed to us. Don Tapscott wrote a book a long, long time ago called The Naked Corporation. You probably read it, probably more than once. And he said, eventually transparency is going to mean that you have to be buff.
Yeah.
And it's more or less true. The only problem that has happened in the last, in the current episode of this era, if you will, is that the whole notion of truth is being warped and misrepresented and manipulated.
Right.
Where we go from there, I'm not sure. I'm not really hugely optimistic. I've had friends and supporters say at times, well, thinking Wirearchy is an important thing to name or whatever, but I'm under no illusions that it's some kind of utopian framework or solution that's going to make things all sorted out. It's not. And even very, very deeply conceived and researched approaches like the Cynefin framework are only going to have small impact here and there in the to's and fro's of what's going on in the world at the moment. I keep recommending to people, I think I recommended it to you once upon a time, and you may have read it, a small little paperback book by Jane Jacobs called Dark Age Ahead.
Oh, I have it. It's behind me. Yes.
Well, so I don't want to be Donald the Downer, but I'm not really super optimistic about the next 20 years. I have a lot of faith in a lot of kids these days are pretty decent and pretty smart, but they're being handed one hell of a set of challenges.
Well, on that, John, I mean, one of the things I want to also double down on is the loneliness factor. So,
yes, right.
what's your take? Given like data suggests that Gen Z is lonelier than millennials, than X, than boomers, yet everybody is far lonelier than we were 5 years ago, even 10. So it just dawned on me. It's like, well, if we're trying to be interconnected with through technology and people, then we've got to be doing something, not you or I per se, but something's got to be in the way or going wrong with the irony that we're more connected than ever, but more lonely than ever.
Well, I think, yes, and that's the part of your question I didn't answer, and I think it's absolutely right. I see it and read about it and hear about it. And I think there's a couple of things. I think that there are many, many examples of um, connectedness leading to significant and ongoing developing relationships. And I'm part of that with some friends, and no doubt you are, with some groups that you're regularly with online. And over time, some of those have become very, very important relationships. There's a fellow I know, I think you might know the name. Do you know Greg Broham?
I don't.
He's in the UK. He wrote a very good little mini book on the Cynefin framework.
Huh.
He's a systems architect at a very, very high level for a number of interesting projects over the last 20 years. I think he used to be with Anderson Consulting, if I'm not mistaken, 20 some years ago. He and I wrote a piece, and I can find it, or you could find it on LinkedIn, about a year ago, about hybrid work and remote work, and incorporating a bit about Wirearchy, but saying that the big thing, and this is oriented towards leadership and towards organizational culture in this new world of work, what people are crying out for everywhere is belonging.
Yes.
And that's what we focus on in the conclusion we come to. I remember, excuse me, even work that I grew to dislike, like working at Hay Management Consultants, when I first joined them here in Montreal. And it's some of my more vivid and fulfilling memories of working for a living because of the people that we got to know. And I'm sure it's the same for you and virtually everybody that's going to listen to this or that works in a workplace. It's the people you come to know and to love, or the people you come to know and to hate, that define your relationship to work and particularly to that organization. And there's no shortage of people all around the world. I met a few of them in the Dominican Republic that said they were star performers, and then somebody new comes in and in sales and fires their ass because they don't like them or because of something, and there's a lot of embittered people all around the world. Anybody that's gotten a performance review that they didn't think they deserve, that was trying to be objective about themselves, probably knows about what I'm speaking of. So there's this notion of, I started out saying humans are social. We need belonging. We are also, I think, something that I hope changes before you and I die, but I doubt it, is that we are more than ever, when I say surrounded and penetrated, I really mean it, by advertising everywhere.
Yeah.
On every screen that you look at, and every time you go around a corner, everywhere you go. And I say it particularly, I know you have three, they're probably not so young anymore, but I believe that we can see the evidence of young children and young people in our society everywhere being heavily impacted by advertising, by fashion, by what people are doing around them, by peer group pressure. And I think it's really insidious. I think people concerned with leadership talk about, like our friend Kenneth Mickelson will be talking a lot about character, deep character. And we used to respect women and men of deep character. And now that looks like it's kind of almost for suckers. If you want to win, you got to be like Andrew Tate or Donald Trump or whomever is going to be the biggest bully, regardless of whether you subscribe to lead, care, and win or not. And it's a mental infection, I think, a cultural infection. I don't know how you get rid of it because I don't know how you regulate advertising. So that's something that is a real pain point for me. And I think the isolation comes from having everything at hand, including most of the shopping you want to do, including your grocery shopping, and being bombarded by advertisements and wondering why your life isn't better or something. which reminds me, and again, I know we've talked about this. I remember it over a beer, a book that I read once upon a time. And I know, Dan, you're one of the people that called me a walking dictionary, or no, a walking library, I guess.
Yeah.
The book Better Living, In Search of Happiness from Plato to Prozac by Mark Kingswell, in which he says, the basic purpose of marketing is to make you dissatisfied with your present life. So you go and buy more to make yourself happy. And I think that's become, over the last 25 years, unconscious behavior in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I'm far from the first to say we're a consumer society. We're deep in it, right up to the lobes of our ears, and then some, maybe.
Well, it's an astute point, and I think my last questioning I want to get into with you, Jon, is tangentially related, and I can't leave this session without asking you, because it is kind of now a new branding, and that is generative AI. And if so, Wirearchy and its intent is to be enabled by interconnected technology and people. And if there is sort of a burdening or blossoming, if I will, imagination deficit by people outsourcing their own curiosity and creativity to some form of generative AI, what do you see that we need to be remembering, if not inculcating, so that human capabilities like empathy, like care, like curiosity, like belonging are still at the forefront as we embark on this new chapter with Gen AI?
Well, I'm glad you used the word remember, because if we break it down into remembering, which is to pull our members, our arms, our legs, our head, our brain, our heart together again.
Mm.
And I'm far from an expert, as you know. I would call myself. I think you were one of the first people you tried the term on, a deep generalist.
Yeah.
So I'm not a technologist, and I'm certainly not an expert on AI, though I'm paying attention, and I started paying attention to what we call AI today, a long time ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I first got into KM with natural language processing and so on. And I think, and I've played around with it a little bit, and I think it's going to be extremely, extremely useful, as predicted, in many, many things, including speeding up and making some kinds of discoveries that otherwise wouldn't be noticed, but for, more sophisticated pattern matching, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, in the context of, I think that I did a few years' work with a man who's dead now, Michel Cartier, translating his work, and the English version can be found at 21century.world. And his lifelong journey was through the use of signs and symbols to create, to make sense and to create meaning, including projections out to, say 2030. A real genius, in my opinion, the Francophone equivalent to Marshall McLuhan in many, many ways. And we've already seen this in a lot of the arguments with AI, but I'm pretty convinced of a few perspectives, I guess. The first one I'll relate to, which is I watched an hour-long video just recorded by himself, probably about 1.5 or 2 years ago, by the iconoclastic Kevin Kelly, the guy that wrote the books like What Technology Wants and so on, where he said, and I think this is absolutely bang on at the end, generative AI is going to force us to confront what it means to be human again. Who are we? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? I also think that it's already too late. The horse has left the barn. Companies everywhere are using it, including feeding all sorts of, creating customized platforms with defined sets of data and bodies of knowledge and so on. But over the longer term, I'm in the context of using the context of Jane Jacobs' book, Dark Age Ahead. And I'm also reminded of the last scene in Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451, where after burning all the books and so on, there's a small ragged band of people who love knowledge out in the woods by the river, hiding from all of the powers that be. And what they've all done is memorize, I forget whether it's one chapter or a whole book of the classics, because the only way knowledge is going to die is when they all die. I'm very concerned, based on my biases and opinions, informed opinions, let's say, about how information is processed and knowledge is managed and then put to use in our generally very commercial world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be also used in government and all sorts of other places. I think it's going to lead to a lot of homogenized thinking and eventually a lot of homogenized behavior. And I think it poses very significant dangers to the scope, breadth, and depth of the human imagination over time. Or people that have vivid and open imaginations will be seen as very odd. Maybe they'll be the special ed people 20 years from now. Who knows? Or maybe everybody will be just blipping down the street, keeping on trucking with their AI in their hand and conjuring up all sorts of fantasies. But basically, I'm fearful. I think a lot of work's going to disappear. That poses an economic and a social problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's going to, I'm reminded once again, I'm sorry, maybe it's just talking to you, I'm reminded of another book, and I think it's one we talked about, and I think it's one you may have read, called Mediated by Thomas D. Zangotita.
Yeah.
Yeah, the subtitle is How Media Shapes the World and the Way You Live in It, or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's talking about performance, but what few people know is that that book is an outgrowth of an article that I still have the magazine in a box around here somewhere from about 30 years ago, The Atlantic, called The Numbing of the American Mind. And the subtitle of that is Culture as Anesthetic. And I would submit to you, that's what's been going on for 30 years with advertising, with culture as anesthetic. So, but, we also see a lot of people recognizing this and pushing back for sure and saying, for somebody that's supposed to be connected, I'm awfully unconnected. I barely use I use this to keep in touch with about 2 people or 3 people. I don't blog. I think that I think it will become fashionable to disconnect for long periods of time, and fashionable for some in the know to craft lives that are very compartmentalized, if you will.
I'm on that note, John. I'm meeting next week with a woman who started a community in Amsterdam called the Disconnected Cafe, and it's a bi-weekly event where people get together, and as you can imagine, they disconnect at a cafe, and it has swelled to 150 members in about 3 weeks. So
yeah, my friend Johnny Moore started that in the UK about 5 years ago, Unhurried Conversations.
Oh,
wrote
yeah.
an article for Wired magazine about the benefits of being slow, and certainly that's what I just did, Dan, for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Is I went to a condo in the Dominican Republic, and I basically went into what I call an odyssey of stillness. I really focused on very structured, eat at 8 a.m., at noon, and at 5:30 p.m., eating very healthy. And in between, I went for swim sessions. So for 6 weeks, I ate real healthy, swam 3 or 4 times a day, about 2,000 meters a day, went to bed early, and almost except for 2 Zoom meetings, basically didn't look at the web for 6 weeks.
Well,
And
that's role modeling, John.
let me tell you, it was just fine. It was a really very fine time.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say this. You are anything but numbing to me. I have much enjoyed our chats over the years, plentiful number of them. To have this opportunity to chat with you live and recorded for others to hear, sort of like as a fly on the wall, some of your deep thoughts and your deep passion for humanity, for organizations, and all that is in between. I can't thank you enough. If people wanted to find out more about you or whereabouts of Wirearchy, et cetera, where might they go?
I think wirearchy.com is down at the moment, and I think it has been for about a month. I have to look at that. Gee, I don't know. I guess just my email, jon.husband@gmail.com.
There you are. Semi-connected Jon Husband, founder of Wirearchy, a principle that has informed many people the dynamic flow of power and authority based on information trust, credibility, with a focus on results enabled by, of course, interconnected technology and people. Thank goodness. Jon, such a pleasure to catch up with you. Thanks for making the time and again for such deep and wonderful insights.
Dan, it's great to reconnect. May the force be with you.
Always. Thanks all for listening to and watching another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, my very good friend in the house today, Mr. Jon Husband.